And welcome to another special edition of Trauma Talk Radio with your host and today's guest, Freedom Coach Natasha. Once again, welcome.
Thank you.
So today's question is, when your past trauma triggers you, how do you deal with it?
When my past traumas trigger me, how do I deal with it? I've done a lot of work, so I have less and less triggers from past trauma. But how I deal with it is I allow myself to experience the trigger. So I'll just allow myself to have that natural human reaction. If I'm frustrated, if it's triggering me to be frustrated, angry, sad, whatever it is, I just allow myself to rest in that emotion. And then I partner with the Holy Spirit and ask inquisitive questions like, okay, I know I'm being triggered in my present. What is it connected to from a trauma of my past, to see what was the traumatic experience that a present situation triggered, and then what do I need to heal from. And there's been particular past traumas which were created a soul wound where I had to revisit that particular trauma and soul wound several times to regain healing on several layers, if that makes sense.
What do you mean by a soul wound for them?
So for instance, I call it the abandonment seed. So one of my soul wounds was the abandonment seed because my father wasn't present in my life. So there was different times that I had to revisit that wound. So one time was when I was just fed up with my foolishness and my singleness. I was like, you know what? I really need to get my life together. But that's when God exposed the wound. I really sought him because I'm like, okay, it's time for me to break this cycle of toxic relationships. And he's like, this is why you settle for them, because you know that you'll leave that person before they leave you. And so you fear abandonment. And then I noticed that I would revisit it again. I revisited again before when we were pregnant with Katora. He's like, okay, it's time for us to revisit this wound so you could be prepared to walk into motherhood and parenthood without any regrets or resentment because you didn't have your father present. So that was another time I had to heal. And then when I became Freedom Coach, there was another time I had to revisit it again to prepare me to work with our partner, collaborate with men. So that's a particular wound that I've noticed the Lord was having me revisit several times, but it always prepared me for what I was walking into next, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So your past triggers you. How do you deal with it?
Mhm.
So sounds like take time out, listen to God, the Holy Spirit, and then follow the instructions. Thanks for explaining what a soul wound.
Yeah.
For the viewers.
Yeah, and I like to share that because sometimes we think that we're completely healed from something until the trigger comes.
Right.
And so I want us to know that there may be layers to that particular wound, and you'll see that God may have you revisit it right before a season of elevation and promotion in your life. Because the first time I really sought him for it, that was shortly before you and I met. That was like about a good year and a half before two of us met. And then, before the children came, and then before the next advancement came. So yeah, so it's okay to revisit the same wound, and don't be alarmed if you're triggered, because God's just preparing you for what's to come, and he wants to make sure there's no residue from that past traumatic experience that will hinder your progression in that next season of promotion.
Now, as a follow-up or like a follow-up question to this, so what about when you get to the point where you recognize those triggers and something is coming, or because of what you're experiencing, oh man, I know this is gonna, or you have a feeling like, hey, this is gonna trigger something because of who you're dealing with or what you're going through.
Right.
How do you because you know it's coming. Like, so how do you deal with? All right, what's a healthy way to handle that for someone?
Right.
Or how would you?
To put in place boundaries. So there may be situations where you have, because we all have family. And
so you might find yourself in a situation,
right? And you already know you may be triggered
and it's coming,
you're not completely healed from a certain thing that happened in the past.
What's a healthy way?
But you still have to be around that person,
or environment, or whatever.
Right. Yep. So I say, what I like to do is establish boundaries, and it's not boundaries as far as proximity, but it's boundaries internally. So it's emotional and mental boundaries. So I already know there's still some friction between certain relationships, and I have to be in this environment, and I know I'm not completely healed and everything to where I could just fully navigate it. I'll set boundaries, and I'm like, okay, I know not to have certain conversations. I know not to be in their presence for a certain amount of time. So I may limit myself to like 2 minutes in their presence, and I'm just cordial to show respect, and then I kind of move around the room. And then I make sure my conversation remains surface. So we may just only talk about the weather, something that may have happened on the news, just so it doesn't get to that place of really being fully triggered. So that's the an unhealthy. So so that's the way that I navigate those spaces.
All right. So let me see if I can recap. So if you find yourself in a situation,
right,
even if you're in an environment or around people and like you already know, like, oh man, this is gonna trigger. So just have boundaries, like be aware and know, like, okay, I'm only gonna do so much, say so much, because I'm in a situation. Hey, I have to be around this person. It might be work, family, environment, like just being in the environment. Hey, maybe I have to do this for work or school or something, but because it's part of your responsibility. But it's like, okay, just have internal boundaries where like I know I'm only gonna go so far. I know I'm not gonna I guess pray about it too,
right?
And
take
it's time out,
and partner with wisdom with that, because that's the thing that to me is not healthy to just cut off people. I gotta be about my healing, I'm just cutting off. That all you're doing is cutting off proximity. You're not cutting off what it is in that person that triggers you, because you'll never be able to cut that off. All you're gonna do is meet somebody else that got that same characteristic. So we have to work on how do I steward my internal self to where their toxicity or anything doesn't trigger me internally. And so setting up those boundaries internally, because I know I can't just cut them off of my proximity. And that's a healthy way to do it. And that's how we learn how to be in situations where we're comfortable, we're still at peace within, because we know how to establish internal boundaries amid close proximity.
And that takes that takes effort. That takes effort.
It takes intentionality. It takes being strategic. Absolutely. And that's what soul trauma recovery is all about. We teach those skills with soul trauma recovery.
All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. I hope that answered this question, because we could go on and on about
right.
Well, thank you so much.
Everybody can relate to that.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for the follow-up question. That was really good to break that down.
Right.